Hello Yu-Gi-Oh players, I'm the RJB0 and welcome to my What to Do About the March 2013 ban list video. Now, last year at a similar time I made a very similar video because, the vast majority of the Yu-Gi-Oh community was having a mass freakout session, and I figured that, it would be kind of important to let people know that the game would still be fun and there were still ways of playing creatively and playing rogue decks and having a good time even in that bad ban list, because it would, suck for us if a lot of good players started quitting right and left. So this year I see people having kind of a scaled back version of the same reaction that they had to last year's ban list, and I wanted to kind of address the same things. The first thing I want to say right off the bat is really, in the scheme of things, I suppose on a scale of 1 to, hey, I hear Vanguard's a good game, this format isn't really that terrible. I mean, it's nowhere near the kind of good stuff that we got from the September format, but it's more like this massive tsunami of mediocrity washing over the Yu-Gi-Oh community, which really is okay, because historically, March ban lists just kind of suck. Like, March, as a rule, is the time when Konami is really trying to push new products and capitalize off of big money decks. And, I don't really begrudge them for that, but it doesn't make the game quite as fun for the rest of us. But this format is actually pretty good in that regard, because it really only destroys one of the fun top-tier decks. It doesn't take away anything from current rogue decks. Well, it takes away a couple of things, I'll get to that later, but for the most part, it leaves some of the most important stuff for a lot of rogue decks, and it actually gave us back fuel for a lot of other rogue decks. So in that way, it's going to be a fairly good format, and also in the fact that they are introducing a lot of new and good things in the near future. Last year, really what we had to look forward to from the format was, I suppose, hieratics, and when they finally came out and people finally decided they were good, it was Chaos Dragons. But this year, we have Harpies and we have Phantom Beastcraft. We have the new Umbral things that are coming out of Judgment of the Light, which is totally cool. And so we've got a lot of good stuff coming up. So let's actually get down to the format discussion. So I'm going to go kind of down the list systematically, card by card, and talk through how decks are affected by that card and what we can use as substitutes if you really wanted it. And we'll just kind of see how it goes from here. So the first one I want to talk about is Singen. The big question that always comes up when I'm talking with my friends about Singen is, what will people use as tour guide substitutes, and will they even use tour guide and Singen substitutes in their deck? Now, my personal opinion on the subject is, I think that the only reason why people even bothered to deal with Night Assailant was not just the fact that it could take out a monster on the field, but also it gave them an excuse to run 2 tour guides in a Singen, so that if they opened with the tour guide into Singen and sit on the Singen play, the tour guide wouldn't be dead. I think without Singen, people probably aren't going to be working the same way. But that being said, if you really do love those double tour guide plays, then there's still some substitutes that you can work with. For Dark Worlds, of course, there is the obvious Brow, but then there are things like Dark Resonator, which is also a level 3 tuner and cannot be destroyed by battle once per turn. There is also Dark Mimic level 3, where if it's destroyed while it's face down, or if it's destroyed by battle when it's in face down defense position, then you get to draw a card. There is also Tour Bus, which allows you to recycle those tour guides once you've used them, so that's pretty cool. So if you really want to use those double tour guide plays, there are still options out there for you. I have something to say and I forgot what it was. Oh yes, decks that are affected by this. I think a lot of decks are affected by losing Singen. I think the decks that are probably affected most have the ability to move on, also have substitutes. I think the 2 I want to talk about right now are Dino Rabbit and Agents. Now, Agents are my personal favorite top-tier deck of the format. I think they're the most skillful, they're the most solid, and they're the most fun. Now, Singen, losing Singen makes the deck slow down a little bit. It makes us It makes it harder for us to get our hand traps, it makes it harder for us to get our earth and get our agent play started, but it doesn't really cripple us, and we also have Birdman that we can substitute in for that Singen if we want to keep another dark in the game. So it isn't terrible for us to lose Singen, but it definitely slows us down a little bit. For Rabbit players, I think what Konami was really trying to do with taking out Singen, besides the fact that the card was just way too strong and was in the game for way too long, was... Let's see, I was going to go somewhere with this. Oh, yes. I think they wanted to push the use of Vers. Without Singen in the game, the players can't really rely on getting Rabbit to the hand early game. There aren't as many tour guide plays to be made. You can't, sit on the Singen and have your opponent run over the Singen or attack with the Singen and go into Rabbit. So they really want to push the use of, like, Vers Caster and Cercion and stuff like that. So, and that's kind of what Rabbit players are going to have to do. That's how how it is working in Japan, and I think it'll work out just fine for you guys over here. But you can't really rely on the Rabbit plays as much anymore without Singen. Moving on to Zen Mighty. I'm pretty sure it's pretty obvious what they did with that. It's the same with limiting Magician. There isn't a whole lot to say. I think windups are still like a fun casual deck to play, but without Zen Mighty and without Magician at at least at 2, the deck is not going to be competitive. I think somebody might in the future come up with a really cool combo with windups, a good mashup that they could do, but until then I think windups are just going to sit on the sidelines. Moving on the limited list, 1 Day of Peace. I don't think there is a single player in the game that isn't glad to see 1 Day of Peace go to 1. If you aren't and you want to complain to me in the comments, go ahead, but we'll talk. Anyway, so the reason why is because there's really no good way of using that card. The only decks that really use it are things like Exodia and Final Countdown decks that are basically bent on making the game boring for everybody involved. So I think, I used it in my Watt deck, but other than that, there really isn't a good deck that uses that card, and it just needed to go. Warning to 1. Now, a lot of people are talking about how this is going to ruin anybody's chances of taking down High Priestess. It's going to make us not have as good a match against I know what I'm talking about here, just a second, Mermails. But, although that is true, there are a lot of cards that can substitute for Warning and do the same kinds of things. My personal favorite is Mind Crush. Now, Megalo and Priestess are both ignition effects. Their summoning is an ignition effect, not a summoning condition. So when Megalo drops those 2 monsters to the grave, then you can call Megalo with Mind Crush and they'll have to discard, and they don't go at the plus, but they do kind of go 1 for 1 with that. It's the same with Priestess. If they reveal those 3 spellbook cards and you call Priestess, they have to reveal their hand, and then you can really plan around how they are going to play for the rest of the turn. So, Mind Crush is going to be a great choice, not to mention the sheer amount of searching there is going to be in the game this format. I think Mind Crush is going to be a very good card. It's a very skillful card, and it's going to be a smart side deck choice, if not a main deck choice, over that second Solemn Warning. I think there are a lot of decks that are actually improved by the loss of Solemn Warning. Obviously, as I already said, Prophecy and Mermails, but also Samurai are really helped by this format, including the loss of Warning. Agents are really going to like the opponent losing that second Warning. I think Chain Beat is like jumping up and down in its seat, and that totally rhymed. Wish I could do that all of the time. Anyway, so I'm really excited about the loss of that second Warning for Chain Beat. I don't think there are any decks that are particularly terribly hurt by the loss of Warning. They're just going to have to start using Bottomless and stuff like that. Moving on, we have the semi-limits. Tsukiyomi didn't do anything at 1, it's not going to do anything at 2. You don't need to really worry about that card at all. Ryo to 2 is kind of a problem for some decks. I think Malefic decks really like Ryo, at 3. I think that some wind-up decks were working with Ryo at 3, and there's some Sun decks that liked Ryo at 3, but really what Konami is doing is making sure that people don't side in that third one against Prophecy. I think that's okay. I think 2 is going to be just enough. If you really need a third kind of stun 1900 beater, I'd go with, I think a good one is Doom Caliber Knight. It isn't as good as Ryo was, or is still, but it can still stop some plays, make your opponent think through things a little harder, and makes them a little more likely to misplay. Moving on to, there's one more card at 2, and I am going to remember what it is, but, oh, Advanced Ritual Art. That's going to be pretty cool. I hope that people come up with some really cool kind of ritual decks. I'd like to see Herald of Perfection come back. Actually, I really don't. I hate playing against that deck, but it's a cool deck. We might see some Demise OTK stuff happening, but we will have to see what happens with that. As far as the cards that are all going to 3, aside from Spore, it's all like really seriously helping out rogue decks. So that's why I think this format isn't as bad as people are thinking it is, because it doesn't really hurt rogue decks, and it doesn't really hurt the variety of the game, but it also ushers in a new era for some old decks that people tend to be really loyal to and people tend to really like. So that's my take on this format and what to do about the March 2013 ban list. I hope this video wasn't too long. If you didn't like it, you can complain in the comments, but if you did like it, definitely hit the thumbs up button. And if you want to see more of these kind of cool discussion videos, and maybe some openings and some deck profiles, and more importantly, deck reviews, you should definitely hit that subscribe button. And this is the RJB0 signing out. As soon as I can figure out how to use a damn Mac.